Ghost of Tsushima may be the most textbook example of a game being greater than the sum of its parts that I can remember in recent history. Despite a host of issues of ranging severity and an unnecessary proclivity towards open-world cliché, the further I progressed into what is most likely Sony's last big-budget PlayStation 4 exclusive, the more I found to enjoy. Developed by Sucker Punch, known primarily for their Sly Cooper and Infamous franchises, Ghost of Tsushima shifts from the studio's typically urban environments to put you in the shoes of Jin Sakai, one of the last remaining samurai in late 13th century Tsushima Island, Japan, amidst a Mongol invasion led by Khotan Khan. The story balances largely between Jin's attempt to repel Khotan Khan in the Mongol invasion, and Jin's inner turmoil over continuing to honor the samurai code or employing more stealth-based, dishonorable ghost techniques in order to achieve his goal. It's disappointing then that the latter doesn't present you with much of a choice in the character you choose to play. Unlike in the Infamous franchise, Ghost doesn't apply a similar karmic system to its world, one that feels like it would be perfectly suited to its themes. You can decide how you choose to handle any side missions, but there are more than a few story points that force you into picking a specific end of the spectrum. Players can play the game as honorably as they choose, face as many foes head-on as allowed, and then assassinate an enemy in a cutscene and be labeled a monster. I'd be completely fine with, and maybe even invested in Jin's transition into the Ghost, if the game made it feel more linear and seamless. It's when I'm given merely the illusion of a choice that I take issue. Your playstyle also seems to have very little effect on the world around you outside of aesthetic weather differences. This lack of choice leads into my biggest overall complaint with Ghost of Tsushima. Its open world often feels like a misstep. The game is vast and beautiful, with tons to do. While there's no game clock, I'd estimate I logged roughly 30 to 40 hours into Jin's campaign, with at least half of the side activities and a majority of the collectibles left unfinished. The problem is that so much of the game's world and the activities within it feel desolate and in place merely as filler. Many of the side quests follow the typical open world formula. Travel to a new point on the map, speak to an NPC who guides you to another spot on the map, clear an area of enemies only to learn you have yet another location to travel to, finally clear your objective, ride back to the original quest giver. It all works fine enough, but it feels like retreading ground that hundreds of games have walked before. It's difficult not to feel that condensing the experience into a more character-focused journey would assist with not only the game's pace but the story in itself. Heading into the final battle sequences, I found Jin having emotionally charged exchanges with characters that, because I had chosen to circumvent their side missions to that point, I had barely spent any time with. It was understandably jarring, and could have been avoided if the game forced me to get to know these characters ahead of time. Luckily, Ghost of Tsushima can be a blast to play. When you've unlocked the bulk of your arsenal and you're firing on all cylinders, combat is rich, varied, and rewarding. Blending both playstyles leads to some seriously badass moments when you pull everything off correctly. The issue is that getting to that point takes entirely too long, and you'll spend a large part of the first 2 acts of 3 feeling underwhelmingly one note. By and large, I didn't find Ghost to be terribly challenging outside of a few one-on-one duels, so those fearing a Soulsborne experience can put their minds at ease. That's not to say I didn't die many times, because I did, but unfortunately a lot of my deaths could be attributed to the game's toughest enemies. It's absolutely abysmal camera and general clunkiness. In fact, the enemy AI can be downright stupid, especially when it comes to stealth encounters. If you get spotted while stealthed, you can typically just jump on top of a building until an army of enemies just gives up and forgets about you. Visually, Ghost of Tsushima is a mixed bag. It's absolutely gorgeous in full motion, when you ride from point to point on horseback taking in your surroundings. There's truly impressive draw distance work at play, and everything loads in very quickly. Colors are rich and vibrant, which makes the game's included Kurosawa mode a tough sell. The other side of that coin comes into play largely in details and consistency. Assets like water can look anywhere from nearly lifelike to blocky and cartoonish. The high-angle orbiting camera during NPC encounters harkens back to the days of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and Grand Theft Auto 3, where the developers stay away from showing any facial animation because, well, there really isn't any to speak of. Again, had Ghost been more of a linear experience, this lack of detail could have been avoided. The music and sound effects in Ghost of Tsushima are excellent. Play it loud. The score perfectly accents the action, and each and every sword clash and hoof gallop feels true to life. Vocal performances from the main cast are well executed, if not outstandingly memorable. Patrick Gallagher delivers perhaps the best acting in his turn as painfully underutilized baddie, Khotan Khan, but it's nothing show-stealing. It may seem like I found little to like in Ghost of Tsushima, but that isn't accurate. In fact, now that I'm taking my time with the game's post-game side content, I'm definitely enjoying it more than I did in my rush to the finish line. Had Ghost been released a few years ago, it likely would have been mind-blowing. The issue is that in 2020, we've played games that have done the majority of what Ghost does, and many have done them better. These shortcomings are hard to ignore when in the company of today's other PlayStation exclusives. There's a lot more that I liked about Ghost of Tsushima, and there's a lot more that I didn't like. It's tough to get into every aspect of the game because there's just so much to it. It does so much well, but manages to stumble through a lot of it. I can't go so far as to call Ghost half-baked, but it definitely feels as if the game could have used a bit longer in the development of it, especially given its enormous scale and ambition. Perhaps a next-generation sequel will be able to truly deliver on all of the fronts that Ghost of Tsushima hoped to. Until then, we're left with a good game that is at its best when you're able to look past its flaws and just try to have fun.